There's a group of eubacteria I want to mention called cyanobacteria. This is a really important group of bacteria. Notice in the pictures there's 13 different kinds of, actually there's 12. 12 different kinds of cyanobacteria in this picture, and notice how they're all green. That green tells us something. This green tells us that they're autotrophic. They must do photosynthesis. They possess the green pigment called chlorophyll, so they're able to absorb sunlight and make their own food. These are autotrophs. They can feed themselves by doing photosynthesis. But there's a real important reason why cyanobacteria are important in the world of biology. There's an evolutionary importance to them. Here is kind of a generic picture of life on Earth a long time ago when cyanobacteria were living in the oceans and no life was on land. You can see the picture says uninhabited land. So this is probably 3 billion or so years ago, even maybe not that long ago. But we're talking hundreds of millions and billions of years ago. Hundreds of millions of years ago. Maybe a billion years ago. Sorry, I'm getting my numbers mixed up. But like it says, the evolutionary importance of cyanobacteria. It says early life lived in the oceans because there was no ozone layer. I hope you know that the sun releases a type of radiation called ultraviolet radiation. UV stands for ultraviolet. And at one time, our Earth's atmosphere did not have an ozone layer. So there was no protection from the radiation from the sun unless you lived underwater. So that's one reason why we were pretty certain that life on Earth originated in the water. There was no ozone layer. That's not the only reason why we think life originated in water, but that's one reason. And cyanobacteria, because they're photosynthetic, they do photosynthesis. And you should know that the byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. So over time, cyanobacteria released a lot of oxygen into the air. And they've been doing this for millions and millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years. They've been releasing oxygen slowly into the atmosphere. Well, this oxygen accumulates and builds up. And over time, this oxygen accumulates and builds up and forms what is called our ozone layer. Our ozone layer is made from oxygen, and notice how the animation has changed. Now that we have this protective ozone layer up in the atmosphere, look at the animation. The UV is blocked. It's not striking the surface of the Earth anymore. This is huge. This was an incredibly important step that allowed life to eventually adapt and evolve and move on to dry land. Prior to this, it would be impossible for life to inhabit land because UV radiation would have just destroyed anything. But now that there is a shield up in the atmosphere, this eventually allowed life to evolve on land. Eventually, plants evolved on land. Eventually, amphibians evolved on land, and we have all the animals and plants and fungus that we see today. But this would not have been possible unless cyanobacteria created oxygen, which eventually turned into the ozone layer. So cyanobacteria played a large role in the evolution of life on Earth. That's pretty interesting, I think, how a small microscopic organism could have such a major change in the history of Earth. So one of the things I mentioned on the beginning slide was how bacteria have a bad reputation. Most bacteria are fairly harmless. In fact, we actually have a lot of bacteria that are used for good reasons. We make various food products out of bacteria. For instance, look at the cup of yogurt on the right. If you read the label on the yogurt cup, it doesn't matter what brand it is. This just happens to be Yoplait. If you read the label, it will say on the label, contains live and active cultures. Well, have you ever stopped to think about live and active cultures of what? Live and active cultures of bacteria. There are living bacteria in yogurt. Now, if you ever have plain yogurt is very different than, for instance, what you see in the picture. Plain yogurt has a very sour taste. That's because bacteria are feeding on the sugar that's in milk, and the bacteria are giving off a chemical that sours milk. And so if you ever have plain yogurt, you know it's very sour. Now most yogurt has sugar and fruit added to it, so the yogurt is actually fairly sweet. But if you try it without the sugar and without the fruit, it's actually very sour, and that's because of the actions of bacteria. We also use bacteria to ferment various products, such as bread, such as cheese, such as sauerkraut, cabbage. And so bacteria are very helpful in fermenting various types of food. Another way that bacteria are helpful, we've already mentioned some of these in the notes today, is, well, cyanobacteria are helpful in nature because they create oxygen. We also mentioned that other bacteria are saprophytes and decomposers, which means they return nutrients to the soil. In the ecology chapter, we talked about bacteria can live among the roots of plants and do a process called nitrogen fixation, which means they basically remove nitrogen from the air and convert it into forms that are more usable. Bacteria are helpful inside of the human body. We have bacteria in our intestines. We already mentioned these, methanogens. Yes, they give off methane, which eventually can turn into a fart, but they actually provide a lot of good. They digest food as it moves to the intestines, and so from their digestion we are able to get other nutrients that would not be available to us. So they're actually really helpful inside of the human body. And industry is learning that you can make various products with the help of bacteria. For instance, you can ferment corn into an alcohol called ethanol. And ethanol is the main ingredient in a type of gasoline called E85. The E stands for ethanol. The 85 means 85% ethanol. So if you've ever heard of E85, there are cars that can run on 85% ethanol, 15% regular gasoline. So we're trying to figure out ways to use less and less petroleum and oil-based gasoline. E85 is one of those alternatives that we're trying to perfect and become better at. The notes also say environmental cleanup. Here we have some people spraying a chemical onto an oil spill that will stimulate the growth of bacteria. The bacteria will grow and they'll feed on the oil. And they actually break the oil down into, oil is naturally toxic, but they break the toxins down into harmless material. So we're learning that bacteria can be used to clean up environmental accidents. The reason for the vial of medication on the right is that bacteria, we're figuring out, also make other antibiotics. Now, antibiotics normally kill bacteria. So is a bacteria going to make an antibiotic to kill itself? No, that's just ridiculous. But if you're antibiotic A, you can kind of figure out, I hope, why would you make an antibiotic? If you're bacteria A, I think I said that wrong, if you're bacteria A, if you make an antibiotic, you might be able to kill bacteria B. You might be able to kill your competition. And so we've actually learned that we can make antibiotics from some of the chemicals found in bacteria. All kinds of good uses of bacteria. This is just the flow diagram. If you want more time to study this, hit the pause button, but it just outlines some of the major categories of eubacteria. This is just kind of showing some of the effects of bacteria inside the mouth. Here's a person with healthy teeth, healthy gums. Well, to the picture on the right, here's a person with gum disease called gingivitis. This is just the swelling and inflammation of the gums. Notice how the gums are a little more red and puffy. This person has bacteria in their gums. Now a dentist will recognize this and recommend more frequent cleanings, and hopefully you can reverse this. But if it progresses, it can lead to what is called periodontitis. Notice how the gums are even more puffy. This is really gross. Very bloody, more puffy. You can see the plaque and tartar built up in between the teeth. This person has a very serious medical condition, bacteria infection. This person's going to require a lot of dental work. But if they don't get it treated, it can lead to what is called advanced periodontitis. Look at how gross this is. It actually looks like the teeth are getting bigger, but that's not what's happening. The gums are shrinking. Because they're infected with bacteria, the gums are actually receding, which simply exposes more and more of the tooth. So I hope you can see the main idea from this. Let's brush, let's floss, let's rinse our teeth on a daily basis. We're trying to control the bacteria that are in your mouth. This is just a recap of antibiotic resistance. In the cartoon, the A's stand for antibiotics, and the pink things are bacteria. And look at the top left-hand corner. When you take an antibiotic, they kill most bacteria. You can see the looks on their face. The bacteria look scared. But look at that one in the middle. That one in the middle is wearing a helmet. The helmet is symbolic of a bacteria that is resistant to an antibiotic. So when you stop taking the A's, look at the A's are going away in the top right-hand corner, you stop taking an antibiotic, it allows the strong bacteria to survive. The strong bacteria now divide and reproduce. Hopefully you remember through the process called binary fission. One cell becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, and over time that bacteria infection can return. The problem is, now all of those bacteria have little helmets on it, meaning they're all resistant. So when you try to take the antibiotic again, it's less effective. So this is why you really have to be careful with antibiotics. Follow the directions given to you by your doctor. This is more for just review. So name this bacteria shape. If you want a moment to think about it, hit the pause button because I'm going to show you the answer right now. This is also more for review. So if you want a minute to think of this answer, hit the pause button because I'm going to show you the answer in a moment. Name this bacteria shape. If you want a moment to think about this answer, hit the pause button, but name these little cell parts that are sticking out around the cell. I'm going to show you the answer right now, so if you want another minute, hit the pause button. Name the process shown in this animation. In the animation, we have one cell dividing into two cells. So now that the animation is just about finished, where one cell divides into two cells, if you need another minute to think about the answer, hit the pause button because I'm going to show you the answer right now. And finally, this is just the quiz at the end. Try to answer these 9 questions. All of these answers can be found somewhere in this presentation. So hit the pause button and you can try to work out these questions one at a time. I'm going to advance the slide because there's actually a 10th question coming up on the next slide. So if you're working on 1 through 9, hit the pause button and try to answer these as best you can. Here comes question number 10. So question number 10 is, can you identify all these parts of the cell? So now that we reach the end, hit the pause button if you're still working on this. And if you have problems, if you want some help working on these, come into my classroom and I'd be happy to go over it with you. Good luck.